And this is about the taxes that are coming away. More pain as Treasury proposes new higher taxes is what is on the front page of the Daily Nation. And VAT is bound to be going up 2% up to 18% from where it is right now if the proposal from Treasury goes through. And this is, as I said, they're trying to harmonize with what the East African community is doing as far as the custom harmonization is concerned, or the custom duty is concerned. You can read all about it in the Daily Nation. Also, cost of goods to go up. State plans to raise VAT. Treasury proposes 2%, as just I've mentioned, and fresh proposals contained in medium-term budget plan before Parliament. Also, we have more tax pain lies ahead for Kenyans, raising revenue. VAT on education, that it seems to have blown the gasket of Gituro Wanaina, is fulminating with anger on this as well. All right, excess duty on coal, motor vehicle circulation tax. Some of the new taxes households will contend with from next year if the proposals are ratified. So, could we talk about taking the smooth with the rough, Bill Okero? Because now, when we talk about the motor vehicle insurance, as it is, we are gravitating to EVs. The government is bound to lose the fuel levy. So this is a huge constituency, or a huge tax that it comes from the fuel levy. They have now to go back to insurance to make sure that they can actually get money from that particular, or what they're losing from the fuel levy, they can get it from the motor inspection taxes.
Yes.
The motor circulation inspection taxes.
You know, when I said earlier, this government, when it comes to matters taxation or economic policy, they're confused. Some of my colleagues here are not amused. But let me say this. When you, in the last Finance Act, raise VAT on fuel by another 8%, but at the same time, you are forming task force to try and do away with fuel, diesel and petrol cars in the next 5 years. I mean, clearly, one thing I have realized is that our government, this particular administration, just like the previous one, seems not to be in touch with reality. You know, when you do not, you forget very fast that you are in a country where 80% of the population lives on subsistence economy. Mm-hmm. You know, for nearly 50% of your country are living on less than $2 a day. People are struggling to make a living. You people are poor. Just about a third have access to even drinking water. You have nothing. You are running, you're looking at the skyscrapers in Nairobi and you forget that the rest of the country is, you know, is a third world country. And you come up with, you know, policies that want to please the developed countries. You want to please America, you want to please you know, Western Europe and so forth. Your policies are all, you know, you want to create that impression that, you know, your country is doing, you're doing very well, you want to lead in this, you want to lead in that. I think we are misplaced. We have a country where we are told every day by the government statistics that nearly a third, nearly 40% of Kenyans live on extreme hunger. Many people, just last week there was a publication about 46% people sleep hungry. They have no food. And here you are, you're talking about introducing a carbon tax, you're introducing this tax and that tax and this levy and that. You know, I think clear the issue is what my colleagues have said. Let us put our energy on expenditure. How to be efficient as a government, how to be effective in our plans, how to come up with, you know, programs and policies that can help the people, to empower them economically. That should be the focus of the government. Nobody is really keen today about just building, you know, infrastructure, huge infrastructure projects that are not impacting on the lives of those Kenyans. So everything of ours is about revenue. Even when we were building SDR, we were told it's going to generate more revenue. Our focus is always on revenue. But we are not saying, is this road going to reduce the cost of freight for goods and services? Is it going to make us competitive in the region? I think that's where we have lost our competitiveness. Everything is becoming expensive, but the government is not really looking at the key issues that are important for the lives of the ordinary citizens. So for me, I think some of these tax policies need to be thought out properly, and we should not be led by, you know, focus on revenue.
All right, as we're winding up on that, I wanted you just to comment on, still on education and the streamlining of CBC Does it also flies in the face of a spirit of, promoting talent?
But let me giftedness. Bill, perhaps Bill, I would have said that there's a total difference between being revenue rich as opposed to wealthy rich. These are two different. And we are missing the first one, the second one. We could have a lot of this, but are we a wealthy country? But in break, we are debating here, and we give an example of even Faith Kipyegon. We are giving the weight of this 19-year-old black American, Coco Gauff, who won the US Open, and congrats to her at 19. That is amazing. And if you trace her, even Djokovic, and I'm talking about tennis because I follow it religiously, even Djokovic started at 4 in school, holding a racket. There's a whole infrastructure, there's a whole ecosystem they are supporting in terms of what they have done through sports. And if you look at why do we have private schools? And one of the key aspects, and we had a very interesting discussion with David, the owner of Riara High School, and it takes pressure from government, because otherwise every kid will be going to a public school. So private schools have a need, have a niche. And therefore, when you look at the kind of sports we are talking about and saying we are going to tax that, then what are we doing to the talent, the swimming? They learn from this school, the garage, they learn from there. And at the end of the day, they have a life down there. And it's interesting when we look in terms of what we are getting from those vis-a-vis the taxation, you probably don't, it doesn't add up. And I need to go back to the point we were making earlier on. The most important thing is to see, and the Kenya Association of Manufacturers is spot on, what are the growth areas? What is it we need to do to a manufacturer so that they can produce more? Power. Look at the cost of doing business. Power. If it's charging me 16 cents per kilowatt, ET is charging 5 cents. Why would I not move to ET? What are the consequences? People lose employment here. I start now selling those items very expensively. But the ball game here, and where we need to be extremely careful as a country, can we look 5-10 years down the road? What are the consequences? Not even that, in the next 2-3 years. When a country reaches that point whereby if I have 1 shilling, I'm taking home 3 cents, then I start asking questions. It will reach a point I can't afford anything.
All right.
And the same Bible tells us, it's a sin to die because of hunger.
Which verse is that?
Just check it somewhere. I don't know where. It's a sin to die because of hunger. You rather steal. You rather steal and not die because of hunger.
But it doesn't say you rather, so that you're not misquoting the Bible.
I'll get it. I'll get it.
It doesn't say
I don't have my phone. I have deliberately said I don't have my phone. But if I have actually Googled somewhere, it actually discouraged.
Okay. Right. But let me just come to, because let's talk about sports economy just a little bit, and in light of what is happening. Because even as we are heading as a country, we have artificial intelligence with us. A lot of jobs will be taken over by this artificial intelligence. There is one thing that is your talent that cannot be taken away. And moving forward, if the country was really keen on developing sports economy that will generate also largely to the GDP, this will be the time to actually put everything in place. In light of football, with other countries, advanced countries, what they're doing, they're concentrating. Because all of us here, I know, and many will have, or you have actually reached the pinnacle maybe of your career, and you're considering maybe capping up something on top of it. You'll be having doctorates. All the students who are now in universities will be having doctorates and PhDs. If you go to the employer, you'll have your A's, you'll have your doctorate and all that, masters. They'll ask you, what extra will you be bringing on the table? Because all of us are qualified. Where is the X factor? And that's why we need not to be punitive on what is happening with the extracurricular services. What does it portend for the future of a sports economy in this country? And not just sports. In other fields that, you know, raw talent, the creative is, yes, because we had, and I hoped even Shemo Chodo will have picked on it, because the government also is hacking back to the data tax.
Right.
If you've realized that, I thought there was some sort of relief, but still now it's going back to that. Could you just comment on that?
The Balfumia, and Professor here used to be my tennis mate while we were in school.
Oh, he plays tennis.
So I'm glad he's still passionate about
very passionate
lawn tennis.
about it.
Okay, is it lawn tennis or squash? The
Lawn
last time I had it was
tennis.
squash.
Tennis.
That we
Played on the lawn.
We used to play together.
That's why it's called lawn tennis. Played
But-
on lawn.
Yeah.
Yes.
But talking
and the clay.
No, these are not tennis.
The clay court. Okay, anyway.
Talking of sport, I was mentioning that the fifth pillar from the bottoms-up economic transformation agenda is digital and creative industries. And part of it is the sport aspect and the creativity that comes with it. On the one hand, it's unfortunate, Debal, that these digital taxes are being sneaked back. It's not good for the economy. Let me put it that, for me, the principle should be, let's grow this cake. Let's bake it fast. Make it big enough fast before we can tax it. I think for me that would be the underlying principle, that can we grow the economy when the economy starts to take off, as I believe it would, if we do right things rightly, then we can start to tax. But I am also alive to the fact that I was privy to be part of a team that's looking at the leveraging cooperatives to promote the creative industry. Government working to aggregate, get sports persons together, the young creative people coming together into cooperatives to be supported to grow. You are aware, Debal, there are people who make $100,000 maybe in an hour just in sport, or maybe even $1 million. We know, and there are Kenyans like that. But how often does that resource get used properly,
you know?
Even in football and other games as well, and in athletics too? Kenya, we've been doing very well. I am alive to the fact that there are attempts to rally those resources so that they can be better used for the benefit of the sportsmen and women, but also for the economy. So in terms of aggregation and empowering, obviously taxation sends the negative signal to what we are trying to achieve. It's not wrong to tax, but can we grow the economy fast so that people can afford live comfortably, even the sports person and the artists, before we can tax?
There is a point perhaps we need to add.
Let me hear, before you go there, let me just hear for Bunyasi Sako, then we'll come to you.
Thank you. Actually, I didn't have any strong view on this to add to what has gone on for a change. But my hope here is that the traditional knowledge about levels and rate of change in taxation have been around for a long time. That for one, raising higher does not increase revenue collection necessarily. There's a level at which it may not increase. Two, and it doesn't grow all the time because there's a pushback. And people can substitute the services or consumption basket that they do in order to minimize tax impacts and so on. The perception that taxation is unmitigated and so on will discourage investment also. So I really hope that there'll be further thought that's given to this, and I think that these should be subjected to serious discussion. So the whole issue about the importance of public participation, not casualty, but substantive public participation, remains important, I think, all through. It's still my hope that probably some of these are leaking, the information is leaking from internal brainstorming or something like that. But sometimes, as I say, where there is smoke, there's fire, or something like that.
Absolutely.
You can't wait and say, let me go check if the fire is there. No, you can't survive like that. So I am hopeful that wisdom will prevail. These things can't be done mechanically. They can be results of modeling and you model, you have a deficit somewhere, you say, plug in this rate of tax increase on this, will it cover the deficit? You say, yes, therefore we have it. No, there must be many more considerations.
So the cue that we have ASECA really coming up with, you said he's a member of parliament from Puisero.
Yes.
That this should be essential goods. Why haven't we classified what are some of the essential goods like maize flour that is very dear to us, a staple food for every Kenyan? When we miss it, everyone knows. Kama hujakula ugali.
It's in the CPI. That basket, that's what tells these are essential.
Yes.
But why are we coming up with a legislation if
he wants the legislatively exclude taxation of those goods?
Yeah.
To keep them, hopefully keep them affordable, so to say, to Mwananchi. I think it'd be a good idea, of course, to go easy on taxes that the poor consume, not just Kenyans, that the poor consume. For example, 40 years ago, that's a long time, but 40 years ago, if you said you're providing relief on rice, people will say, oh, don't do that. There's only a narrow spectrum of the population that depends on rice per se. But now that has completely, tastes have changed. It's broadened into many, population groups and so on and so forth. So I really think that the government will listen to the cry, or the short-term challenge of how to deal with the ultra-poor in accessing food, that this would be considered. That may be implicit, maybe at the base of Mr. DMP for Puisero's legislation. I do not believe that it will see the light of day. Now, it may be difficult, but I hope that it will spur some discussion on how to provide relief, consumptive relief for certain categories of the population. We don't have any support programs, the ultra poor. I see them where I live, in the constituencies that I've represented, both at my constituency, but also at the county level, truly ultra poor, and we have no rural kitchens to support, and so on. We must have these kinds of relief. We can't be blind to it.
All right. So, Bilo, we just reminded as well that today, I think, is the EPRA review of fuel prices. Looking at your tea leaves, what are you reading? Are we going a cent down? Because it seems now we're going by a cents, but we're increasing by shillings. But if it's paring down, we pare by cents.
No, I think based on the international movement of the oil prices, because this thing is normally done a couple of years, a couple of months down the road, based on what the situation was a couple of months ago or last month, I got a sense that they will probably review the prices up. And even the the stabilization fund also that they talked about, I think seems to be not entirely available. I've seen independent oil dealers complaining that they have they've not been paid, and that they in fact might lead to shortages of fuel. So I think it's worrying unless government does something about it. The prices go up in a situation where the economy is already getting in this dampened economy, the situation will even become worse. I would think there would be sense that they will have to look for money to continue with their subsidy on the petroleum. Otherwise, if the prices should, based on the international the Platts, it should go up.
It should go up. On the digital tax, if you may just allow me to hark back on it. Okay. You say it is being sneaked back, and we saw 22 proposals that were sneaked. Yeah. There was a public participation.
Right.
Publicly, we saw it. They go before the finance committee. If it's being sneaked back, what does it mean? That the voices of the people is not really adhered to, or it doesn't really matter?
The bill, although I would try to avoid this politics as much as possible, but when we say that the views of the public is not absolute, the civil rights I'm a little bit at a loss, because our constitution in the preamble talks about the supremacy of the people.
Correct.
So I think that's something that needs to be relooked at, unless they are misquoted. But having said that, about this bill that the honourable member is bringing, talking of essentials, I would have no problem with it if we got the essentials right. From eating healthy and indigenous foods, one would say that ugali, and this could sound controversial, and rice. There are indigenous foods, what one may call the poor man's, and Mheshimiwa was talking of the ultra poor, the grassroots, the people who can access the mirandas, the managus, the mukimos, and all those kind of foods. Perhaps if those were aligned as essentials, that we make it easily affordable. The more we eat healthy, it's clear that we'll have to spend less on health, on health services, and of course in terms of food security. Right. But in terms of sneaking the digital tax back, to give government due credit, I think even as we are talking, the president, together with the leading bankers and the US ambassador in the US, at the Silicon Valley, trying to promote our Silicon Savannah. I think it's commendable. Perhaps what's lacking is execution. There is the goodwill that's being expressed. In this meeting at the hotel I was talking about, there were probably 500 private equity investors that are eyeing. Part of what I realized was almost 3/4 of people who were in that meeting were non-Kenyans, because they were not looking like you and me, which tells me that there is something that we have among our young people here in terms of creativity and the digital economy. But are we doing the right things to support them? I think when we start to tax the digital space, I think we're sending, in my view, a wrong signal. Let's grow it first. It's still too premature. I remember in the older days when we started having mobile telephony, when there was talk of let's levy so that we can supply water. Water was used as an excuse then, and some of us were opposed to it. Grow it first before you can tax it. So for me, anything that kind of discourages investment more in the sector. Let's ride with this wave. Kenya will not always remain attractive for digital investment.
Right. Okay, so we want to talk about the credit rating agency that the African Union is mulling over as well. This was a bit of an issue that we had last week, that we're being marginalized, but we have now officials of the African Union who are saying the regional body is planning to launch a new continental credit rating agency focused on addressing unfair lending risks designated to African nations. The AU's move, expected next year, is in reaction to leaders who say global rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P Global Ratings, do not fairly assess the risk of lending to African countries. The big three rating agencies have denied the allegations, as our reporter Alice Rizzo tells.
The African Union is planning to launch a new African credit rating agency next year. The aim is to address the group's concerns that ratings given to countries on the continent are unfair, an official told Reuters. The agency would craft its own assessment of the risks in lending to African countries. It would be based on the continent, be self-funded, and would add context to the information investors consider when deciding whether to buy African bonds or lend privately to countries, the African Union said. The African Union and leaders of member nations alleged that the big three ratings agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P Global Ratings, do not fairly assess the risk of lending to African countries. They also claim that they are quicker to downgrade them during crises such as the global health crisis. Broadly speaking, credit ratings are designed to gauge a borrower's risk of default and factor in the terms on which banks and others will lend to them. All three ratings agencies have denied bias and say their ratings follow the same formula across continents. Moody's, Fitch, and S&P Global Ratings did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
All right, so have we been marginalized? We saw maybe an 8% percentage difference with what Africans' facilities have and the Europeans or the Western countries when it comes to, Bretton Woods institutions. Do you think that's the way to go? I know Bill Okero has always wanted also to come up with an audit and the rating, maybe an agency as well. I don't know, maybe.
No, well, I think there's nothing wrong in Africa Union coming up with a credit rating agency, but we cannot run away from the fact that if you are a lender in the US or in Europe, you would be more inclined to use credit rating agencies in those countries, the Moody's and those ones, because those institutions have been in existence for hundreds of years and been more reliable, and they criticize. By the way, their rating also is not necessarily positive always for their own countries, for those countries. You remember last month, the US government complaining about Moody's downgrading of the US credit rating. So it doesn't necessarily, it points out to the level of independence some of those institutions have. But one thing is true, that some of those institutions may not have the facts about some of the African countries, really, and there's that traditional bias about third world countries, and they some young man on a desk in those agencies would be the one tasked to give a rating on DRC, on Kenya, so
college intern.
You may therefore say, yes, I think it's time. Africa has come of age. It's now the attention. It's, in terms of the economy, it's the future, really, and this is why you find many regions trying to partner with Africa. Russia, from Japan to US and China and everyone. I think so. I think it's the way to go in future. But we cannot run away from the fact in AU, in Africa, that we are our own worst enemies. We have problems with our governance. Unless we address the issue of good governance and the way we manage our economies, getting ratings there is not going to be a solution. Because rating is all about getting credit. So by forming AU, forming credit rating, the concern is really about getting more loans. And so if you're still thinking of if getting loans, then we are misplaced. I think we need to be focused on how to develop our economies, how to enhance the development, the management of our countries, leadership, governance. Those are the things that they should be focused on, not how to get our credit, more credit.
But is it the time now when they're realizing that you've been marginalized in terms of the ratings there?
Yes. I hear what Bilo is saying, the limits to which, the limits of the usefulness of a regionally developed rating system. It works only as much as there is at the level of trust that there is by the providers of the service and so on. And it of course reflects on the cost of borrowing, but also on the security of investment placement. I say it can affect absorption too, if there is a perception that in fact the risks are high. Now, it's true that there has been marginalization for a long time. There has been marginalization in the globalization processes, around trade and so on, favoring largely countries in the north, always. There has been marginalization in the attitude of countries that control the multilaterals like the Bretton Woods institutions. It's always, how does it impact our country? And just to illustrate this, as a time when they were discussing the issue of authenticity of origin, and Lesotho had become, at one time, I think it was in the 90s probably, was the biggest exporter of textiles in Africa, Lesotho. Lesotho doesn't grow much cotton, but it would import cotton. There had a lot of Chinese manufacturers there. Cotton was imported, processed, and sold out as apparel and so on. And rules are being changed. And then there was an outcry, say, for poor Lesotho, does it really matter, which way it goes? But for them, the question there was that it's going to put pressure on them, competition on the industry, which they will not accept. So I think that for Africa to begin to think in terms of a rating agency, for me, has the following advantages. One, that we now begin to appreciate the importance of behavior, of the outcomes of our own behavior and attitudes. And I think that's important It's almost like, remember when they began this NEPAD peer review, that you would get a chance to which you are able to score on the performance of presidents, as it were. It's tougher when you are scoring your own, but it's not usually so difficult to score on another and so on. But the fact that it will be accepted and it will be done is an improvement. And similarly, that Africa now begins to focus on having a rating agency may help them internalize why they must behave in a certain way, why must minimize corruption, why governments have to listen to the criticism, to the comments from their citizens, why governments have to listen. In Africa, for example, it's not the size of the expenditure envelope that matters, it's the impact on growth and distribution and so on. So I see that in indirect advantage, that because you begin to think about it, you internalize the requirements, internalize the implications faster. But it's true that relying on Standard and Poor and Moody's, I think there are three, I forgot the third one.
S&P.
S&P and Moody's.
And Fitch.
Yes, and Fitch. Is really relying on the decisions being made in certain decision rooms in New York or somewhere, mostly in North America. That's where these are very... But with the world economy changing a bit, China beginning to tilt the scale somewhat, doesn't mean you don't need a credit rating, because they're also being rated adversely, mostly by these American ones. But it simply means that different appreciations will enter into the picture. And that if you are rated low, you will not go into the junk bond level in your borrowing, meaning that you get the worst rates that there are. You might still get some consideration somewhere else for political economy reasons. That always happens. But I think we must learn to appreciate, just like I want to conclude, I'm talking for too long. Like, for example, on a different issue, but very similar, on our credit CRBs, credit rating bureaus, they may have their weaknesses, but there's a time when there was such hostility that they must be removed, that young people below 25 must not be rated, and so on. There are very many advantages of rating. And if you throw them away, then you're going to promote bad behavior. And by the time you begin to capture it, it will be too late in the game.
All right, so in terms, because even we can juxtapose what was happening with the Hustler Fund, and the repayment of the Hustler Fund has been an issue. Almost 60% have, defaulted on the Hustler Fund.
No, 40%.
Yeah.
The monthly paid payments about 60 something.
The bulk, before we leave
from the report I saw, it was, yes.
The AU part, starting from a positive point of view, the past 1 week, I think Africa has been invited into the group of G20. That's a positive development. We are hoping that we'll have effective representation at the G20. But at the same time, the BAL, in terms of, and some of your viewers and good friends involved on matters Pan-Africanist are saying, look, what's happening in the continent. The coups, particularly in Francophone West Africa at the moment, problems of governance. And I think Bilo raised a bit of it. Just this past week, there was an indictment on the AU Commission where the African Court, it's called AU Tribunal in Morocco, did rule in favor of some former staff. And they said the rot and corruption at the AU leadership is an issue. Governance is something here that needs to be addressed. When we moved from the OAU to AU, the BAL, it was to bring better governance. So yes, even as we have better credit rating, but we must look inwards. What can we do to make sure that we do our things better? If there was better governance, maybe the kind of turbulence we are seeing in West Africa would be less, better elections. But overall, we must remember that we are competing with the rest of the world in terms of attracting investment. A friend was reminding us that even in the West now, people get some good returns in terms of, it used to be 2%, 3%, 4%. But now they're getting even up to 9%. So one would say, why would I invest in a risky environment where high cost of power and so on, and graft and all, instead of in the West? Lastly, in my view, with regard to, Billy was talking of energy. A few weeks here, we were talking about nuclear, and many were laughing at it. Do we know that Rwanda, I think, was reported last week, they're looking into nuclear, and they are a landlocked country. Yet for Kenya, we could go micro mini reactor, put it even in Indian Ocean. But ultimately, we must find a way to bring down cost of energy. And in fact, I think what happened with the blackout that we recently witnessed vindicated, I was reasoning with my colleagues that we need more power. The mere fact that we are on this threshold, that even just a little degradation of power, we have a shutdown, means we need more power and affordable, clean power.
And affordable, clean power. I wanted just to, as we also considering our headline thoughts as we wind up, and ask Gituro Wanaina, we have the Africa Free Trade
Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah, agreement.
Sure.
Up to now, and we know the potential of it, that it runs into trillions of dollars that we can actually use as our strength. Even if now we've been installed as a member of a G20, where are we at in terms of streamlining Africa, the AFTA, up to now, since it was installed in it began in January 2021?
Sure.
21, yeah. But going back to what you're saying, the bottom line is like saying Equity Bank has a different rating because I'm a Kikuyu. Doesn't make sense. That's the bottom line. Sure. Let's put our house into order.
Correct.
As Africa. The same with the trade. And this week we had actually a conference here in Sereni. And this young man from Uganda, they have a caucus of young people. And it's hot here. Is there a day to trade with Africa? You go signing, certain countries have signed with AU, others, they're not signing with the African countries. In Uganda, where I was, there was a conference, Professor Adogomi from Nigeria, he was talking on this trade. And he said, and there was a study done with 6 countries. And one of the things they identified, this desire, this unfulfilled desire we have for foreign goods. So as even in Africa, I'm going to have a desire for foreign goods. We have this desire to export to our motherland. So to answer your question, unless we come back as African countries, and I'm happy that we are saying free movement of goods, even within East Africa. Will work. You know how much long it takes you from Kinshasa to Libreville by air? And it's like some 5 kilometers. It takes you an hour. Because of the time, you're going to another country and all this. Unless we start addressing that, unless we see that within ourselves, we can even feed ourselves, and you can feed out there, that treaty is headed nowhere. That leadership, and it's good to have the morning flower Addis there. If we can't bring ourselves to, the treaty is going nowhere. You remember the discussion we had here. We got a treaty here with EU, which was anti what we have agreed within the East African countries. So what are you saying at the bottom line? We African countries need to bring our together. I like the young boys, what they did in Gabon. Was it Gabon, Niger? Uranium, I think they were selling at $4 to France. Now they are selling at 200.
It's selling at 80 cents.
They were selling at 80 cents.
Yes, for the longest time.
Right. Now they are selling like $200.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. And that's what we need within the continent itself. So, Diba.
All right.
All
right. So finally, exit Huduma, enters Maisha card. We wanted to interrogate a bit about Maisha card and what happened to, first of all, Huduma number. And the money that was spent has not been really accounted for, and we are looking for an extra 1 billion shillings now to install Maisha card.
How much are we raising out of that? How much shall we be
So can we talk about this Maisha card? Because I think is a big issue that maybe Kenyans need also to be intimately familiar with. First of all, questions regarding Huduma number. What happened to Huduma number?
You know the
bill might know.
No, what happened?
He got a contract to do it.
Because they need to explain to us what happened to Huduma number, first of all, before we embrace Maisha card.
I think two aspects of it, let me mention. First, this whole thing about digitalizing this data personal identification data, I think is a bigger picture. It's something that has been driven by from the UN. It's something that they want. Sort of an international identity that would make it easy for countries across the world to try and identify people across different jurisdictions and so forth. So it's something that I know is being pushed up to the UN level. But the manner in which different governments, subscribe to that idea, it's something that we should not be surprised about, because many of the countries that are concerned about the personal data of their people do not agree to those things. Countries, jealously guard data, information relating to their people, and there are constitutions and laws that protect the privacy of individuals. But a country like ours, where some young fellows just walk into KCC and line up 1 million Kenyans and start taking pictures of their
just the risk
eyes
of it,
in broad daylight, you can tell you how it easy to be to do even something more sinister. So I think that thing was not properly explained by Kenyans, the Huduma thing. It was by the government. It was not properly explained. Kenyans went to court. It stalled, but over 6-7 billion shillings was spent. According to the opposition, it was up to 15 billion.
10, 11 billion.
According to other figures, up to 10-15 billion was spent, and that's the end of it. It's one of the many stalled projects, and that's the end of it. Now, I'm surprised that this government is coming up with again a similar thing, give it another name called Maisha card, a new generation ID card and so forth. Frankly, this is all, new generation ID card, new generation number plates, new generation passport. These are all, every government that comes into power, every 10 years, has to look for ways of making money. This is nothing, in my view, other than a way to try and make money. We've seen it when the Kibaki team came in, when the Uhuru came in. Every year, somebody must start something new in every ministry to try and... So I don't think, frankly, that it will be fair, because everyone has to pay for it. Ultimately, you'll be forced to go and get new ones and pay some money. But the important thing is not even about that, but it's about the data.
Indeed.
The integrity of the data. For us, that is the most critical thing. And I think this government has even done worse than what Uhuru did. At least during Uhuru, they tried to explain what this Huduma was. There was a lot of explaining. This one, we're just being told is going to be rolled out. And that's the end of the story. No,
we don't ask questions.
No
critical, because this is data mining.
This is serious.
And we need to be told. How many times have we been taking data? We were told in 2011 that we will do our elections purely digitally.
Yeah.
They collected data. In 2013, they collected data. They're coming to Huduma number, they collected data. Before they explain to us, we need to know, or they tell us about Maisha card, we need to know if someone can come from America or elsewhere with the WorldCoin and charge or pay you 7,000 shillings. As a country, we need to ask ourselves, you just show up and look at this thing magic, and we will give you 7,000. You ought to ask yourself, why 7,000 is not just an easy money, a freelance that you can just be given in any day.
Some are saying
what are you doing with my data? And that's what we need to know. I mean, what happened with did someone trade with the Huduma number data? Because you asked us critical question, even the
government. There's a risk that even the government can't trade with our data with those countries. I'm telling you, don't rule out some of these countries. You can actually provide that data for security purposes, whatever reasons they have those countries in exchange for.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the light side,
can we?
Some are saying they were actually paid 2,000 shillings instead of 7,000. With the light touch, I think we have seen reports like that in the media. But maybe more fundamentally, in terms of data, for Huduma, a current senior staff at Safaricom and I wrote an article that was carried by one of the national newspapers. Bora Mradi or Mradi Bora. We were basically cautioning government. Then they were talking of spending 6 billion shillings. And our premise as informaticians was we didn't need to use so much. For hardly 2 billion shillings, we would have used existing systems.
There's a certain percentage for to keep our pockets.
Reuse them together so that we still having what we call a single point of truth is important. So being uniquely identified as an important issue. Of course, in the issue of data privacy, I really feel jittery whenever I go for a meeting or to a building and you're asked to write your phone number. I feel very jittery because I don't know what happens to it. But that notwithstanding the BAL, it's good to do this right. It's not good to kind of have a knee-jerk arrangement to introduce this new project. Where we go wrong is we don't involve the professionals in getting it done right. So in my view, there are professionals. Government has first failed, particularly the previous regime. Even when Parliament passed what was called the ICT Practitioners Bill, the President, for some reason, strange for me, refused to assent to it. Because we need to streamline. If we streamline, currently everybody is a specialist in this field. So it's some people prefer it when it's chaotic like it is, because then they benefit the most. However, I would not be as critical as see any project being done. Huduma number was definitely a white elephant. But I wouldn't, maybe the intention was good at the start, but people took advantage of it. If
but there has to be accountability.
People need to be questioned. Where did the 10, 11 billion shillings go? What did it achieve? Somebody needs to be answerable here. But in particular, when the current government is talking of 1 billion shillings for this number, for me, if it was to be done right and concluded, that's a reasonable figure, being that about 2 years ago we made an assessment. If we were to reuse existing data already with the Huduma number, the data with IEBC, data with KRA, data with the IPRS, that's the Integrated Population Registry System, with the National Bureau of Registration of Persons. If all that was to be integrated, it shouldn't cost more than 2 billion. So 1 billion, in my view, if it can be done well. And I must compliment what the CS of Interior has been doing, cleaning Nyayo House. Hopefully, he's going to clean.
This is where the 55% comes from.
Yes.
Okay. So you were talking about you always have the bugbears and fears when you're giving out your data, because the government also came and mainstreamed the e-citizen. But even now, when you use the e-citizens for some of the services, sometimes it doesn't work, and then someone has to ask you for your details on their phone to actually pay for you through the e-citizen. And I found out that a bit to be also risky in light of data protection as we're talking right now. Are we still trying to, if in the US, where the president has gone right now to the Silicon Valley, they still use even the snail mail? But we have options. But digitally there.
In the US, they have a very interesting number. The social security.
Right.
It does everything for you.
It does everything, but still they maintain other ways of doing. Why are we in this country having everyone, even some of them, they don't have smartphones?
It's interesting, and I was telling Shem the other day, we started a church, and he refused. They're very easy way to con Kenyans. One of the easiest ones is to test the church.
I think, Prof, you're missing the point. What I'm trying to raise is the fact is, because not everyone is owning a smartphone.
Fair enough.
If you say we go on e-citizen to everyone, then not everyone is digitally plugged. You're having access to internet.
That's why I said people live in this city, they don't see what's happening outside Nairobi. So the government seems to be focused on policing. And some of these things are being done to comply with some international or some other protocols or some other requirements. But I think we seem to miss the fact that we are living in a very poor, underdeveloped third world country where majority of the people are struggling to find bread, to put water, even fetch water, to find. So the government is not in touch with reality. That's why when they come up with some of these things, with respect to my friend, digital, nuclear, all those things, fine. But really look at your people. Where are they? True, there are people in urban centers who can do all those things. But the majority, you tell my folks in Mandera there, you must do everything, you register everything through he may not have that smartphone, he may not have internet access, he may not have many of those things. But the question about the integrity of data really is the central matter in this country, because governments are not trusted. many governments in our countries cannot be trusted. And we read about this every day, how entire countries, governments are being run by some individuals from some countries. And, and they sell your data for a pittance.
Indeed.
I agree with
Just briefly as we're winding up.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues, the contribution on this. Just to re-emphasize that government shouldn't be proceeding with the Maisha card as if life was normal. They ought to have come out clearly with a statement to explain what was the intention with the Duma card and where did it end, what's the safety of the data that they collected, blah, 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 that they need to come out with. And also to show why it is in the citizen interests to have more data uploaded into the new cards. So you can find out a lot more information on these persons than you would. It's other than just basic identity of that you are so and so truly, and this is if origin or residence is important, and these are sort of reflected. I think they're proceeding without adequate participation, and you can easily foretell that this will end up in court somewhere to stop it, because they're taking this decision in their own hands. They think it's good for you, so we'll do it. Right. That's a little condescending, and I think it's very important to come out clearly and say where we have come from.
Just to underscore in my final one, that aspect of doing things right. The same as this migrant labor levy or fund. Ordinarily, public service starts with a policy before you even bring a law.
Correct.
So maybe the Ministry of Labor should have started well with that, engage the diasporas, get their buy-in, because the fund may be a good thing. In fact, other countries, I think India and Philippines, have a similar way to cushion their migrant workers, particularly in the Gulf region.
And there are benefits. There are a lot of benefits.
Let's have a conversation so that's done right.
Thank you. Let's leave it at that. I think we'll pick up the conversation next week as we see some of this developing as well, looking at the Maisha card that is being also introduced into the public. I want to thank our panelists very much for that immersive discussion that we've had, especially it has been tax heavy today. Such a heavy going subject, but thank you so very much for your input, just to make sure that at least Kenyans have an inkling of what is happening as far as the taxes that are coming their way. And we hope and pray that, of course, we'll have strong shoulders to balance these